She loved me so much. I mean, I wasn't a perfect mother. So many ways I wasn't a perfect mother. She always forgave me. I miss her so much.
I just got home from work and my wife, I can't find her. My kids were in the house and I don't know where she is. I've looked every single place.
Everything looked normal. It's just the only thing that wasn't normal was the fact that obviously Denise wasn't there.
Back when I was smart, I would let them come to me. Just remote area.
When a loved one goes missing, it is one of the most stressful and traumatic times that anyone can experience. Whether it's a partner, relative, or friend, this anguish can be soul-destroying. People who put themselves in potentially dangerous positions often expect the worst, but a person can be kidnapped from the street, their workplace, even their very own home. Today, we look at the case of Siam Lee, a 20-year-old that had become involved in the adult industry. She left for work one afternoon but did not arrive at her destination. Her badly mutilated body is discovered and the hunt for her killer begins. Next, there is the case of Denise Amber Lee, a 21-year-old stay-at-home mom. When her husband arrived home one afternoon, he found the kids home alone, with Denise nowhere to be seen. The search that followed uncovered a catalog of failures by the 911 service that shocked the nation, as Denise was led to her death by a maniacal killer. Finally, the heartbreaking and shocking case of Samantha Koenig, kidnapped from her workplace. Her psychopathic abductor demanded a ransom, and you won't believe what he did to prove she was still alive, in the sweet young girls who were kidnapped and killed in gruesome ways.
Doesn't matter what you do for a living. Nobody can rape you, murder you, burn your body.
A days-long search comes to a tragic end as the body of Siam Lee is finally found. South African police were alerted to the find by a passerby, and her identity was confirmed a short time later. She had gone missing after leaving her workplace, and despite a furious search, they did not make it to her on time. Police already had a suspect, and he was known to the victim. The hunt was on to find her killer and justice for Siam. But how did Siam Lee end up meeting the man who would eventually murder her? The story is both heartbreaking and terrifying. Born in 1997, Siam was brought up around the sex worker lifestyle, as that was what her mother, Nan Lee, did for a living. Although born in Hong Kong, she and her mom moved to Durban, South Africa, after her father, a wealthy businessman, Howard Greenspan, passed away in 2005. Siam's future looked financially secure, as her late father had left her a substantial trust fund. She attended the prestigious Crawford College, and she had everything she needed to aim for success. Or so she thought. As soon as she turned 18, the money stopped, and Siam was left to fend for herself, having lived for years assuming she would inherit a large sum of cash. Her dreams of becoming a teacher looked to have ended almost as soon as they had begun. This brought hard times for both Siam, and she worked several jobs to make ends meet, but she always seemed to struggle and needed to earn more. And then, in 2017, she was lured into the same adult business as her own mother. But worse than that, her mother helped her to do it, and they even worked in the same house together. Siam would only perform massages, as her mother still wanted to protect her from the darker side of the business.
It's very important people understand that Siam was never ever a prostitute. It's just never ever going to become one. You know, this was a means to an end until trust fund would be reinstated or she had saved enough to study and go teach. Or
before her hopes were realized, she would meet a client that would end up becoming her murderer. By October 2017, Philani Ntuli had been visiting Siam for massages. In fact, he was so taken by her that he asked her out on a date the very same day. She accepted, but when she returned from the date, Siam was not happy.
As she came into the door, which was 10:15, she went like this. "Oh God, Mom, I never want to see that guy again. He's so weird. He's so creepy."
Sadly, her instincts would be right, and only a few months after meeting, Ntuli would arrive at the brothel Siam worked at. Only this visit was unannounced. Armed with a gun, he forced his way through the brothel and crashed into Siam's room. Then he took her. He escaped with a captured Siam in his black Mercedes-Benz at high speed. But his careless driving got the better of him, and he crashed into another car. Instead of an easy escape, Ntuli would be chased down by the driver he collided with in an angry exchange. The driver would become a crucial witness in identifying Ntuli as the kidnapper. Siam was driven to a house in Durban North where she was kept captive for around 24 hours. From there, she was driven to a location in New Hanover, a location surrounded by sugarcane fields. This would be Siam's last resting place, and it's not even sure whether she was alive when she was moved or what had happened in the time since she was taken.
The sickest, incomprehensible act of probably done on her for 2 days. And she was the most gentlest, sweetest, kindest, timid, beautiful girl.
What police are sure of is the sickening ordeal Ntuli inflicted on Siam before her death, and the ferocity of the attack. She had been bludgeoned with a hammer in what must have been a terrifying few minutes of an unimaginable pain.
Her flesh was normal, and her nail varnish was on this hand. But when I looked into her face, she had a whole hole in her face. There was no face, and there were no teeth.
The next morning, a farmer is going about his day when he sees something just off the track he was walking down. He could not have been prepared for what he saw lying amongst the sugarcane. Siam's body had already been set alight with petrol and left to burn in the field. When the media reported the incident, the outrage began, and messages of shock and support flooded social media. The case also caught the attention of private investigator Brad Nathanson, who was horrified at the sickening crime.
On that day, I got on my knees on the veranda and I prayed to God that I'd be the person to arrest this man.
Nathanson would get the chance when a witness stepped forward, but not just any witness. The owner of the car that had been hit by Ntuli during his escape had come forward. After some clever investigating, Nathanson not only had information on the mysterious black Mercedes-Benz, he had the owner's address.
I'll never forget taking that man down and handcuffing him and looking at his attire and smelling how good he smelled, expensive aftershave, and noting that he had a Mont Blanc pen in his pocket. And I thought to myself for a fleeting moment that I made a mistake, that I arrested the wrong guy.
But there was no mistake, and Ntuli, now under the watchful eye of the police, was going to go on trial for the kidnap and murder of Siam Lee. But the worst was yet to come, as he revealed the details of Siam's final shocking hours. He later told both Nathanson and the police that he had raped her several times and would have let her go, but she told him she would go to the police no matter what. Unwilling to be caught, he decided to strangle this innocent, terrified girl to keep her quiet. But he would stop as she started to spasm, and instead grabbed a blanket and a hammer. Those present at the interrogation have described the chilling conversation with the suspect, claiming he said he wanted to put her out of her suffering these spasms, that he felt sorry for her. Ntuli was described as casual, matter-of-fact, and showing no remorse for what he had done. He faced a courtroom as he answered to the charges against him, and with that, the case was set, and the legal terms began to prepare for a trial that would cause a media storm.
The accused is facing it's more than 8 charges, ranging from kidnapping, murder, defeating the ends of justice, possession of unlicensed firearms, and failing to report an accident, and more. I'm 90% sure that he'll get a conviction and a sentence and pay for what he has done to the woman.
But in a tragic turn of events, this sick and twisted killer would never make it to court. The media reported that Philani Ntuli had died while on bail, having never answered for his crimes. But this was not confirmed straight away. In fact, it took over a week for the authorities to actually confirm his demise, which led to all kinds of theories that he had faked his own death to evade justice. But the reports were true. He had died from skin cancer in a twist of fate, where life somehow dealt out its own kind of justice. This devious, heartless killer would never suffer a lengthy sentence behind bars, but we can feel some comfort that his painful, final few days would have been justice enough.
Please. Where are you at? Can you tell if you're on I-75? I don't know where your phone is. I'm sorry.
That was the voice of this woman, Denise Amber Lee, and these are some of her last words before she is killed by psychopathic killer Michael King. This 21-year-old was already building a family with her husband, Nathan, who worked hard to provide everything his family needed in their home of Northport, Florida. He called home from work on the morning of January 17th, 2008, to chat to his wife while he was on a break. One of the things they talked about was how hot the weather was, so Denise decided to open some of the windows. Little did she know what dangers were lurking outside that fatal day. At around 3 p.m., Nathan called ahead to check on his family while driving home. Usually, nobody answered the phone. In fact, he tried at least 8 times to get through to Denise during his journey home, and by the time he got there, he didn't need to go inside to know something wasn't right. All the windows that should have been opened were closed, and Nathan was instantly suspicious. But things didn't get any better when he went inside the house. Denise Amber Lee was nowhere to be seen, and even worse, she had left the kids at home in a cot. The children, only 2 and 6 months old, were both unharmed. But with Denise's car keys and handbag still in the house, Nathan feared the worst. He made the first of what would be many 911 calls in a bid to find his wife.
Northport Emergency?
Yes, I'm at 7912 Ator Avenue. I just got home from work, and my wife, I can't find her. My kids were in the house, and I don't know where she is. I've looked every single place.
Next, he called a man by the name of Rick Goff, who is not only a detective, he was Denise's father. The response was fast, with teams in the area within the hour and a furious search underway. It wasn't long before a witness came forward with information. A neighbor told Nathan she had seen a white male driving a green Chevy Camaro at around 2:30 p.m. as he pulled into the driveway of the Lee's residence. It was longer than 10 minutes before the vehicle was gone, and Denise with it. It's possible her actions saved her children's lives, maybe even sacrificing herself for them. But now she was in the back of the car, being driven to an unknown location and probably terrified for her life. But who would kidnap this beautiful young mother who apparently had no enemies? What this man had planned for Denise will turn your stomach and break your heart.
Are you gonna help me? Are you gonna let me out now? Oh, please.
The voice of her captor is a man named Michael King. At 36 years old, he is unemployed and facing financial ruin. On January 17, 2008, King decided the Lee residence would be his target. He gained entry and forced Denise from the house and into his car. She was bound on the floor of the back seat and no doubt fearing for her life as King drove her to his house. It was here that Denise Amber Lee's nightmare would really begin. King raped Denise several times while holding her at his house. After he had finished the sickening abuse, he drove over to his cousin's house, and the items he asked to borrow tell us all we need to know about Michael King's intentions. As Harold Muxlow was asked for gasoline, a flashlight, and a shovel, he could not have expected the sight of a strange woman escaping from the back of his cousin's car. Denise begged Muxlow to call the police, but King dragged her back into the car and told him to forget it. Disturbed by what he had just witnessed, he returned home and spoke to his daughter, Sabrina, who immediately called 911. But just before she did, they had already received another call from the person you would least expect. During the struggle as she was dragged back into the Chevy Camaro outside Harold Muxlow's house, Denise managed to grab a hold of King's phone. As soon as she got the chance, she called 911 and would try to tell the dispatcher she was being kidnapped without her kidnapper finding out. Her first chilling call came through at 6:14 p.m. Then at 6:23 p.m., Sabrina Muxlow called 911 and relayed what she had learned.
And the girl came got out of the car, and my dad's cousin went and put her back in the car. And when she got out,
okay, where's your dad's house?
It's in Northport.
Where would he be going with this female?
He came over to my dad's house, borrowed a shovel, a gas tank, and something else.
It appeared as if the attempted kidnap was not going unnoticed, as concerned residents all called 911. Jane Kowalski saw a man acting suspiciously in his car and heard what she thought was a child screaming in the back seat. Harold Muxlow himself even called, attempting to disguise his identity.
Is he going to hurt the girl?
I don't.
Did you saw them though?
Yeah.
And where was she? In the car? Was she okay?
However, due to the problems with dispatch, none of the calls from Denise herself made it to the right person. But the same night, at 9:15 p.m., a police officer who heard the news spotted a green Chevy Camaro and pulled it over. King was soaking wet, and on him he had the very phone that Denise had used to call 911. He was arrested on the spot. In the backseat of the car, all the officer found was a muddy shovel in what would be a heartbreaking sign of what happened to Denise. They found the body of Denise on January 19th in a shallow grave. The mud in the field was the same that they found on King. He had shot her in the head at close range. However, there were some serious failures from the dispatch system that meant this kidnap could have been stopped, and you won't believe how close police were to saving Denise. Jane Kowalski's call never got forwarded to the correct destination, and 2 dispatchers were suspended over it. To add even more heartbreak to this already tragic story, it turns out there was a police car stationed close to where King was driving, but they never got the crucial call that could have ended the ordeal. But Denise, even facing death, managed to keep her wits about her and plant incriminating evidence in King's car, always the detective's daughter. The heart-wrenching 911 calls were used during trial and shocked the courtroom and the nation. The overwhelming evidence against King meant this case was over before it even began.
For the murder of Denise Amber Lee, the defendant is sentenced to be put to death in the manner prescribed by law.
But get this, he actually tried to appeal the sentence in 2016, but was thankfully denied and is currently locked up and safe behind bars, awaiting his own death. If we can take anything positive away from this gruesome, unnecessary death, it will be the action that was taken and the changes that were made. The Denise Amber Lee Foundation was created by her husband, Nathan, and its aim was to raise awareness of the human errors made by 911 dispatchers and how improvements would be made to prevent anything like this ever happening again. The Denise Amber Lee Act came into force not long after, which required extra training for call dispatchers. Her family can at least look at all they have achieved in the wake of her death, and as upsetting and sickening as these cases are, they are nothing compared to what the next disturbing killer did to this helpless, terrified victim, both alive and dead. This is the family of Samantha Koenig, who disappeared on February 12, 2012. Here, they make frantic pleas for her return. As she came to the end of a long shift at her coffee shop, she was approached by this man and abducted in a terrifying ordeal caught on camera. Just as all hope seemed to be lost, her family received a beacon of hope as a ransom note arrived, and it included a picture of Samantha to prove she was still alive. Desperate to get her back, the ransom is paid, but instead of returning her, her kidnapper takes the money and makes a run for it. You won't believe the sinister truth behind the ransom photo. Anchorage, Alaska, famous in many ways, but not usually for kidnapping in broad daylight, even though it does offer discretion to those who need it or want it with such open spaces and sparsely populated areas. Common Grounds Coffee Shop, much like your average coffee shop, frequently busy and popular with the locals. 18-year-old barista Samantha Koenig was closing shop for the night when she was approached by a man ordering coffee. This man was Israel Keys, and although he wasn't known to the police yet, he soon would be, and for all the wrong reasons. Samantha would not finish her shift that day, as the man pulled a gun and demanded all the money from the cash register. But it wasn't just the cash that this predator wanted to take. It was Samantha as well. He bundled her into his vehicle in what could only have been the most anxious and scary experience. Samantha fought back, but could not overpower her abductor. But instead of being taken to a location right away, Keys drove her around in his vehicle for several hours. During this time, he told his victim it was just a ransom kidnapping and no harm would come to her. But he first needed to throw suspicion off her disappearance, and the arrogance with which he did it is shocking. They returned to the coffee shop, where Keys grabbed her mobile phone and began the first of many deceptions. He messaged Samantha's boyfriend, pretending to be her all along, and told him, "Hey, I'm spending a couple of days with friends. Let my dad know." This was all Keys needed to buy him the precious time he needed to carry out his insidious plan. He drove them to his house, leaving her in his truck. Why would he not take her inside his house? The answer is both simple yet disturbing. Keys lived with his girlfriend and a 10-year-old daughter, and they were home as he arrived. During the whole ordeal, Keys has reportedly reassured Samantha that this is purely for ransom money. Eventually, he asked for her address so he could get her bank card from inside her boyfriend's truck in order to finish off his plan. In a heartbreaking turn of events, Keys was actually confronted by Samantha's boyfriend as he was breaking into the van. Keys fled, and at this point, nobody was even aware Samantha was missing. Had her boyfriend had any idea that the man breaking into his truck had his girlfriend held captive, he may have pursued him further. Samantha, at this point, no doubt scared and fearful for her life, was about to find out her kidnapper's true evil intentions. Israel Keys poured a glass of wine after checking his child and girlfriend were safely asleep. By this point, Samantha is tied up in his shed by a cord around her neck. It's alleged that this psychopathic killer sat down and described what he was going to do to Samantha and then carried out his threat. She was raped and then strangled by the cord around her neck in a brutal and heartbreaking end to this promising young girl's life. But he hadn't finished with Samantha yet. In fact, he had other places to be before he could deal with her body. The next morning, in a move that is so unbelievable and so chilling, he simply packed up his bags and took a vacation with his family, as if nothing had happened at all. 2 weeks later, Samantha's family received the ransom photograph that was to prove Samantha was alive, with a demand of $30,000 to be deposited into her bank account if they wanted her returned safely. In this recreation photograph, Keyes can be seen holding up a newspaper to prove the date. As you've probably already guessed, Samantha was already dead by the time they received the photograph. How Israel Keyes tried to deceive them is amongst the sickest of acts one person could do to another. In order to make everyone believe she was still alive, Keyes took her body and applied makeup and tidied her hair. But that isn't even the worst of it. He had to make sure she looked conscious, so he sewed her eyes open with fishing wire and set her up in a chair. Only the most deranged minds could come up with such evil deception. He then contacted her boyfriend, who picked up the photo and ransom note. The $30,000 was raised and the money paid on the assurance that Samantha would be returned, meaning everybody believed what they saw and assumed she was still alive. They could not have known that he was already cutting up her body and would dump her in a frozen lake near Palmer, Alaska. Only days later, the card was used across several locations from Anchorage to Texas, and the police hunt was on. So far, Keyes had executed every part of his plan perfectly. He was withdrawing the money, he wasn't even known to the police, and more importantly, he fooled everyone into thinking his victim was alive. But he made one mistake that ended up giving the police the information they needed to catch their suspect. Even though he wore a disguise to fool anyone who saw him, his car was spotted on a security camera as he withdrew money, and finally, they had somewhere to look. On March 13th, an officer saw the car, followed Keyes, and in a stroke of luck, pulled him over for speeding. When the officer found Samantha's bank card and cell phone in his car, he arrested him on the spot, and finally they had their man. But they had no idea who they were dealing with until they got him into the interrogation room, where he confessed to killing Samantha and showed no remorse.
I almost feel guilty. Costing the taxpayers a lot of money to find this. But just kept my mouth shut.
What they did not know was just how dangerous the suspect was. He eventually confessed to 3 more murders, including Samantha's. He also admitted to killing Bill and Lorraine Curry, an unsolved murder that took place after a break-in. Police believed at the time his victim count might be as much as 8. Keyes was set to go to trial to answer for his most sickening of crimes, but he wasn't going to go quietly. In May 2012, he tried to escape from court, only to be detained successfully. However, before he could be brought fully to justice, this cowardly killer took his own life after managing to smuggle a razor blade into his cell. By his body was a death note on which he had drawn 11 skulls in blood. Police believe this may be the actual number of victims of the brutal, heartless killer, Israel Keyes. Kidnappings are amongst the most terrifying of crimes. Simply not knowing if a loved one is safe and well is one of the most stressful and emotional times anyone could experience. When kidnapping turns to murder, the only hope is that the killer will be found and brought to justice. But, as we have seen on these cases, these killers can escape justice through ill health or suicide. But we should sleep better knowing at night that the streets are a little safer without these psychopaths roaming them. Let me know what you think of today's cases in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to keep up with the most horrifying crimes ever committed.